My world ended with a single piece of paper. The telegram felt cold in my hand, colder than the Massachusetts winter howling outside. The words were simple, blunt, like the swing of an axe. Arrangements have been made. Just 4 words. 4 words to tell me, Catherine Hartley, a 20-year-old orphan, that my life was no longer my own. My uncle stood over me, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. He was a man who saw me not as his dead sister's child, but as a problem to be solved. And he just found his solution, 3,000 miles away. "You'll be Mrs. Everett Blackwood by summer," he announced, snatching the telegram from my numb fingers. "A wealthy man, a cattle rancher in the Wyoming Territory." Wyoming. The name itself sounded like a desolate wasteland, a place where dreams went to die. I stared out the window at the old oak tree, its bare branches clawing at a gray sky. I'd spent my whole life in this town, under this tree. Now it was all being ripped away. "I don't even know him," I whispered, the words feeling useless, like dust in the wind. "He's 45, and my uncle snapped, his voice sharp and final. "He's established, and he's willing to take you on despite your circumstances." He meant my lack of a dowry, my lack of parents, my lack of value. "Consider yourself fortunate, Catherine. Most girls in your position end up in a factory or on the street." He wasn't just sending me away, he was selling me. The train ticket would arrive in a week. I was to be shipped out like livestock in a fortnight. That night, the house felt like a tomb. I couldn't breathe. I slipped out to the stables, the one place that still felt like home. The smell of hay and old leather was the only comfort I had left. My horse, Maple, a beautiful chestnut mare my father had given me, nuzzled my shoulder as if she understood. "We're going west, old girl," I whispered into her velvety ear, my tears soaking her mane. "Though I doubt he'll let me take you." The thought of leaving her behind was a fresh kind of agony. It felt like leaving the last piece of my family, the last piece of myself. "Talking to horses again, Miss Catherine?" The voice made me jump. It was deep, familiar. Daniel Foster stepped out of the shadows, his tall frame cutting a silhouette in the lantern light. He'd worked our stables for years, ever since we were kids. In the long, lonely months since my parents died, he'd been my only real friend. The only person who looked at me without pity or impatience. "Daniel," I said, quickly wiping my face, "you startled me." He stepped closer, his weathered face etched with a concern that felt more genuine than anything my uncle had ever shown me. At 24, Daniel had the eyes of a man who'd seen too much of the world's harsh side. "I heard the news," he said softly, "about the telegram." Of course he had. In a town this small, secrets were a luxury no one could afford. "Wyoming," I said, the word tasting like ash. "To a man old enough to be my father." Daniel leaned against the stall, his gaze unreadable. He was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching between us, filled with all the things we'd never said. Then he spoke, and the words would change everything. "I've been thinking about heading west myself." I looked at him, really looked at him. There was a resolve in his jaw I'd never noticed before. "You have?" He nodded, not taking his eyes off me. "Not much for me here anymore. My brother's out near Cheyenne. Says there's good work for a man who knows horses." He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower, more urgent. "I could go on ahead, scout things out, see what this Blackwood fella is really like." A tiny flicker of something ignited in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just a possibility, a crack in the stone wall of my future. "Why would you do that, Daniel?" His calloused hands, usually so sure and steady with the horses, fidgeted with the brim of his hat. "Because you deserve better than being crated up and shipped off like a piece of furniture," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And because I care what happens to you, Miss Catherine." For the first time since that telegram arrived, I felt like I could take a full breath. The air didn't feel so heavy, so suffocating. "When would you leave?" "End of the week," so he said. "I could write, let you know what to expect, give you a friendly face to look for when you get there." "I'd like that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I reached through the stall slats, my fingers brushing against his. The brief touch felt like a lifeline in a storm. And Daniel, out west, I think I'll just be Catherine. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time that night. Catherine, he repeated as if tasting the name. And in that moment, under the dim light of a stable lantern, a silent promise was made. A promise that I wouldn't be facing the desolate West entirely alone. But what I didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just offering a helping hand. He was offering an escape. An escape from a fate far darker and more terrifying than I could ever imagine. The truth about Everett Blackwood was a secret buried deep in the Wyoming dirt, and Daniel was heading west to dig it up. The 2 weeks before I left passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and silent goodbyes. My uncle was practically vibrating with relief, eager to have me off his hands. He handed me a train ticket and a small purse of coins, with all the warmth of a man settling a debt. "Mr. Blackwood will meet you at the Cheyenne station," he said, not even looking me in the eye. "He expects you on Tuesday." I watched him walk away without a backward glance, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just a profound, chilling emptiness. The train whistle blew, a mournful sound that echoed the hollowness inside me. I was truly, completely alone. The world outside my window changed with every mile. The rolling green hills of Massachusetts flattened into endless, sun-scorched prairies that stretched out under a sky so vast it felt like it could swallow you whole. For 5 days, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels was my only companion. At night, I would read Daniel's first letter, which had arrived the morning I left. He'd written it from the road. "Wyoming is nothing like home, Catherine. The land is hard, but there's a kind of freedom in it. Cheyenne is a boomtown, rough around the edges, full of cowboys and prospectors and people running from something. I've found work at a livery. Your Mr. Blackwood is a known man here, a powerful man. They say he owns half the territory. They also say he keeps to himself. Something about him doesn't sit right with the folks I've talked to. I'll learn more. Be careful. Yours, Daniel." I traced his name with my finger, wondering what he'd left unsaid. The closer the train got to Cheyenne, the more the knot in my stomach tightened. When we finally pulled into the station, the noise and the chaos were overwhelming. The platform was a swirling mass of humanity. Cowboys with dusty hats, businessmen in fine suits, families with weary faces. It was a world away from my quiet little town. I scanned the crowd, my heart pounding, looking for an older, well-dressed man who might be my future husband. I had no idea what he looked like. My uncle hadn't even bothered to show me a photograph. Then I saw him. It wasn't Blackwood. It was Daniel. He was leaning against a wooden post at the far end of the platform, looking taller and more solid than I remembered. When his eyes met mine, a wave of relief so powerful washed over me that my knees nearly gave out. He pushed himself off the post and walked toward me, his boots kicking up dust. "You're here," I breathed, the words coming out shaky. "I said I would be," he replied, his gaze taking in my travel-worn dress and the exhaustion on my face. He took my bag from my hand. I looked around, my anxiety returning full force. Is Mr. Blackwood here?" Daniel's expression shifted. A shadow passed over his eyes. "No," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "He sent word. There's some trouble at his ranch." "Rustlers," he said. "He's arranged for you to stay at the Wayrite Hotel until he can come for you. In 3 days." Relief and insult warred inside me. He couldn't be bothered to collect his own bride. "I see. I've already secured your room," Daniel said, offering me his arm. "I thought maybe you'd like a decent meal before you're locked away in a fancy hotel." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. There was something else. Something he wasn't telling me. "What is it, Daniel?" I asked, stopping in the middle of the crowded street. "What aren't you telling me about Mr. Blackwood?" He guided me forward, his hand firm on my arm. "Nothing that can't wait until you've had some food and a moment to breathe," he said, his voice low. "Let's just say my letter was an understatement." The restaurant was a small, bustling place filled with the smell of roasting meat and strong coffee. We sat at a corner table, and for the first time, the sheer strangeness of my situation hit me. I was dining alone in a strange town with a man who was technically my uncle's stable hand. "This isn't proper," I said, the words slipping out. Daniel gave me a wry smile. Wyoming has different ideas about what's proper, Catherine. Out here, women can own businesses. They can vote. They have rights. He leaned forward, his smile fading. Which is a good thing, because you're going to need them. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. Daniel, tell me, what did you find out? He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine across the table. Blackwood is rich, all right. Richer than your uncle even knows. Owns 10,000 acres, maybe more. He's powerful. People are afraid of him. He paused, and his next words landed like stones in my stomach. He's also buried 2 wives. The room suddenly felt cold. 2? The first died in childbirth, they say, about 12 years back. The second, she died of a fever just 3 years ago. Daniel's voice was grim. But that's just the official story. The folks who worked for him, the ones who talk after a few whiskeys, they whisper things. They say the second wife wasn't sick. They say she was trying to leave him. That she was found at the bottom of a ravine with a broken neck. He called it a tragic riding accident. I couldn't breathe. My uncle hadn't just sold me to a stranger. He'd sold me to a monster. And his age, Daniel continued, his jaw tight with anger. Your uncle told you 45? He's closer to 60, Catherine. And there's more. He looked down at the table, as if ashamed of the words he was about to say. There was money exchanged, a lot of money, more than just your travel fare. Your uncle didn't just make an arrangement. He sold you, Catherine. He sold you for a price. The stew in front of me turned to ash in my mouth. My own flesh and blood. My mother's brother. He'd handed me over to a potential murderer for a bag of silver. Why are you telling me this now? I whispered, my voice trembling. The train leaves every day. I could have gone back. And gone where? He asked, his question not cruel, just brutally honest. Back to the man who sold you? To a town where you have no one? He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. You can't go back, Catherine, but you don't have to go forward with him either. There's another way. You could stay here, in Cheyenne. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Stay here? How? I've spoken to the woman I work for, Mrs. McClintock. Her sister runs a dress shop. She needs an assistant. It's not much, but it's a living. There's a room above the shop. You could be your own woman, Catherine. Independent. A desperate, wild hope flared in my chest, but it was quickly smothered by fear. And what happens when Blackwood comes for me in 3 days? He has a contract. He'll drag me to his ranch and... I couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel's hand reached across the table, finally closing over mine. His grip was strong, steady, a lifeline. It was an agreement your uncle made, not you. Here in Wyoming, that matters. We just need to make sure that by the time he comes for you, you belong to someone else. I didn't understand what he meant. His eyes were burning with an intensity that scared and thrilled me all at once. Before I could ask, the restaurant door slammed open, banging against the wall. A huge man stood framed in the doorway, his shadow falling across our table. He was dressed in an expensive black coat, his face weathered and hard, his beard streaked with gray. His eyes, cold as a winter sky, scanned the room and locked onto me. Every sound in the room seemed to die. The clatter of forks, the hum of conversation, all of it just stopped. Miss Hartley, he said, his voice a low growl that was not a question, but a statement of ownership. I'm Everett Blackwood. I handled my business sooner than expected. He didn't even glance at Daniel. His gaze was fixed on me, assessing me, weighing me like a prize steer at auction. And in that moment, I knew everything Daniel had said was true. I wasn't a bride-to-be. I was prey. Daniel was on his feet in an instant, placing himself slightly between me and the hulking man who now owned my life. His posture was calm, but I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a forge. Mr. Blackwood, we weren't expecting you. Blackwood's cold eyes finally flickered toward Daniel, dismissing him with a single glance. And you are? Daniel Foster, an acquaintance of Miss Hartley's from back east. I see, Blackwood said, and the way he said it made it clear that he saw far too much. He saw a stable hand dining with the woman he'd paid for, and he didn't like it one bit. He turned his attention back to me, his gaze crawling over my face, making my skin feel tight and cold. Your belongings have been moved from the Wayrite. I have a suite at the Cattleman's Hotel, a more suitable establishment. You'll come with me now. It wasn't a request, it was a command. The air in the room was thick, heavy. I felt pinned to my chair, my voice trapped in my throat. All of Daniel's warnings, all of my fears, were standing right in front of me, breathing down my neck. Daniel spoke, his voice steady and respectful, but with an undercurrent of steel. Sir, Miss Hartley has had a very long journey. She's exhausted. Perhaps it would be best to let her rest and make proper introductions in the morning. Mr. Foster, Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Your concern for my fiancée is noted, and it is no longer required. He extended a hand toward me. Shall we, Miss Hartley? There was no choice. To refuse here, to make a scene, would be foolish and dangerous. I looked at Daniel, his face a carefully blank mask, but his eyes were blazing with a silent, furious message. He was telling me to go, to play along for now. I stood on legs that felt like they were made of string. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Foster, I said, my voice formal and distant, for Blackwood's benefit. My pleasure, Miss Hartley, Daniel replied, his jaw tight. Blackwood's hand clamped down on my elbow, his grip possessive and firm. As he led me out of the restaurant, I risked one last look back. Daniel was still standing there, a solitary figure by our abandoned table, watching me go. And I felt something precious, something full of hope, slipping through my fingers before I'd even had a chance to hold it. The Cattleman's Hotel was everything the Wayrite was not. It was a palace of dark wood, red velvet, and gilded mirrors, designed to flaunt the wealth of the cattle barons who stayed there. It was suffocating. Blackwood installed me in a private parlor while he spoke to the clerk, then led me up to a sprawling suite on the top floor. We'll dine here, he announced, gesturing to a table already set for two. More privacy. My heart hammered against my ribs. He must have seen the terror on my face because he added with a thin, humorless smile, You will have your own room, of course. I am not a savage, Miss Hartley. We will be married properly. A minister's traveling from Laramie. When? The word was a choked whisper. Sunday. 4 days from now. It gives us time to reach the ranch and make the preparations. He studied me then, his eyes cold and appraising. Your uncle's letters described you as pliable. You'll do. The insult burned. I felt a flash of my old spirit. Mr. Blackwood, I don't think... Your thoughts are not required at present, Miss Hartley. He cut me off, his tone still conversational, but with a chilling finality. You will find I am a reasonable man. I provide for my own, but I expect obedience. Your life at my ranch will be comfortable, or it will be difficult. The choice will be yours, and it will be determined by how quickly you learn to obey. Dinner was a nightmare. The food was exquisite, but I couldn't taste a bite. Blackwood spoke at length about his empire, his cattle, his land, the house he had built, the finest in the territory, he boasted. He spoke of his expectations. I was to run his household. I was to entertain his business associates, and I was to provide him with sons. He never asked a single question about me, not about my home, my parents, my dreams. When I tried to speak of Massachusetts, he waved a dismissive hand. The past is of no consequence. You are a Western woman now. You are to be Mrs. Blackwood. The sooner you forget Catherine Hartley, the better. After the meal, he showed me to an adjoining bedroom. My bags were already there. We leave at dawn, he said, his eyes lingering on me in a way that made me want to scrub my skin raw. I've had more practical traveling clothes sent up. That Eastern dress is hardly suitable for the trail. He closed the door, and I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. Not in my door, but in the door connecting our rooms. He had locked it from his side. A small mercy, but it felt like the prelude to a far greater horror. I sank onto the bed, the sheer, crushing weight of my situation finally crashing down on me. I was a prisoner. In 4 days, I would be married to this cold, cruel man. I would be taken to an isolated ranch miles from anyone, where he had already buried two other wives. My uncle hadn't just sold me, he had sent me to my grave. I stumbled to the window and looked down at the bustling streets of Cheyenne. It was a town full of life, full of choices and chances. And somewhere down there was Daniel. Daniel, who had offered me another path. An impossible path, it now seemed. The thought of him, of his quiet strength and his surprising kindness, brought tears to my eyes. Hot, desperate tears. A soft knock at my main door made me jump. My blood ran cold. Had Blackwood changed his mind? Was he coming for me now? I crept to the door, my heart pounding in my ears. "Who is it?" I whispered. There was no answer, just the sound of a piece of paper being slipped underneath the door. I waited until I heard faint footsteps receding down the hall before I snatched it up. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unfold it. The note was written in a familiar, steady hand. It was just a few words, but they were the most beautiful words I had ever read. McClintock's livery. Dawn. A choice, if you want it. D. A choice. He was still offering me a choice. But how? Blackwood was powerful. He had eyes and ears everywhere. Escaping this hotel, this room, seemed impossible. But the alternative was unthinkable. I looked around the gilded cage Blackwood had prepared for me. He thought he had me trapped. He thought he had bought and paid for my obedience. But he didn't know me, and he had severely underestimated the stable hand from Massachusetts. As the first gray light of dawn began to touch the sky, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to the ranch on Sunday. I wasn't going to be the third Mrs. Blackwood. I was going to run. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The entire night was a long, silent scream of terror and indecision. Every creak of the hotel floorboards, every distant shout from the street below sent a fresh jolt of panic through me. Blackwood was just on the other side of a door he could unlock at any moment. Daniel's note was a burning coal in my pocket. A choice, if you want it. Did I want it? I wanted to live. But what kind of life would I be running to? A fugitive, a woman alone, with a powerful, vengeful man hunting her. Blackwood wouldn't just let me go. He'd see it as a theft. I was his property, and he would come to collect. But the alternative, the image of his cold, dead eyes, the thought of his hands on me, the whispers of his two dead wives, that was a different kind of death, a slower, more terrifying one. As the sky outside my window began to soften from black to a deep, bruised purple, my decision was made. A life of uncertainty was better than a life of certain misery. I would rather die free on the prairie than live as a slave in Blackwood's mansion. I dressed in my simplest, darkest traveling dress. I didn't touch the new clothes he'd bought for me. I packed my small valise, my hands moving with a strange, calm purpose. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, burning resolve. I slipped out of my room. The hallway was silent, lit by gas lamps turned down low. My heart was a drum against my ribs as I tiptoed past Blackwood's door. I didn't breathe until I reached the grand staircase. The hotel lobby was deserted, except for a young clerk dozing behind the front desk. He barely stirred as I glided past, my shoes making no sound on the thick carpets. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the pre-dawn chill of Cheyenne. The air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. The streets were just beginning to stir. A milk wagon rattled by, its driver tipping his hat to me. I nodded back, trying to look like a woman out for an early morning stroll, not a fugitive escaping her gilded cage. My destination was McClintock's livery. It was on the other side of town, and every step felt like a mile. Every shadow seemed to hold one of Blackwood's men. Every corner I turned, I expected to see his hulking figure blocking my path. By the time I saw the wide open doors of the livery, my nerves were screaming. The familiar, comforting smell of hay and horses washed over me. I hesitated in the doorway, my courage suddenly failing me. What if this was a trap? What if Daniel had been caught? "You came," His voice came from the shadows, and I nearly collapsed with relief. Daniel emerged from a stall, and he wasn't alone. He was leading a horse, a beautiful chestnut mare with a familiar white star on her forehead. Maple? I gasped. My horse. My Maple. Here in Wyoming. How? I arranged for her transport before I left Massachusetts, he said, stroking her neck. Sent a wire to my brother. I couldn't stand the thought of your uncle selling her off to some stranger. I figured you might need a friend out here. The gesture, the sheer, impossible thoughtfulness of it, shattered the last of my composure. Tears I hadn't even known I was holding back streamed down my face. I rushed forward, throwing my arms around Maple's neck, burying my face in her familiar mane. She was a piece of my old life, a piece of home, and Daniel had saved her for me. He had saved us both. I can't believe you did this, I sobbed. Have you decided, Catherine? Daniel's voice was gentle, but urgent. The sky was getting lighter by the minute. Time was running out. I wiped my eyes and straightened up, pulling on a strength I didn't know I possessed. I can't marry him, Daniel. I won't. I'd rather starve in the street than be that man's wife. A visible wave of relief washed over his face. Good, he said, because I have a plan. Mrs. McClintock is expecting you. You remember? The dress shop, her sister. But Blackwood, he'll find me. He'll tear the town apart looking for me. Let him, Daniel said, his jaw set in a hard line. He handed me Maple's reins. By the time he realizes you're gone, you won't be a runaway fiancé anymore. You'll be an employee of a respectable business owner. In Wyoming, a woman's contract of employment is just as binding as a marriage contract made by a greedy uncle. He can't force you to go with him, not if you're under someone else's protection. I stared at him, my mind struggling to keep up. He hadn't just planned an escape. He'd planned a new life for me. He'd found a legal loophole in this rough new world. Will you be in trouble for this? I asked, the thought suddenly chilling me. Blackwood was a powerful man. He could ruin Daniel. Nothing I can't handle, he said, though the look in his eyes told me he was downplaying the danger. Come on. We need to get you there before the town is fully awake. We walked through the quiet, waking streets, me leading Maple, Daniel carrying my bag, a silent, determined couple moving toward an uncertain future. The dress shop was a small, neat building on a side street. A stout, gray-haired woman with kind eyes was waiting in the doorway. She had to be Martha McClintock. This must be our Catherine, she said, her voice warm and welcoming. My sister Kay told me all about you. Don't you worry, dear. You're safe here. The kindness of these strangers, who owed me nothing, was almost too much to bear. I could only nod, my throat tight with emotion. Daniel turned to me. I need to get back to the livery. Be seen. Make sure my alibi is solid. He looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. Stay inside. Don't go near the windows. Blackwood is going to be furious. He'll have men everywhere. Please be careful, Daniel, I whispered. I will, he promised. I'll come by this evening, after dark. He hesitated for a moment. Then his hand came up and gently brushed a stray piece of hair from my face. Be safe, Catherine. He turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner, leaving me on the doorstep of a new life. Martha McClintock ushered me inside, and as the door clicked shut behind me, I knew I had crossed a line. There was no going back. I had defied Everett Blackwood. I had chosen freedom. And now the real fight was about to begin. The dress shop was a sanctuary, a small, quiet world filled with the scent of fresh linen and cedar. Martha McClintock was a woman of few words but immense kindness. She showed me to a small, clean room above the shop with a narrow bed and a window that looked out onto a quiet back alley. Half the women in this territory came here running from something, dear, she said as she handed me a fresh set of towels. A bad husband, a bad debt, a bad reputation. We don't ask questions. You do good work, you keep to yourself, and you'll be fine. For the rest of the day, I stayed hidden in that small room, listening. I heard the town come alive outside my window. I heard the distant shouts of men on horseback. I imagined them to be Blackwood's men, their faces contorted in anger, searching every hotel, every stable, Every outbound stagecoach for the bride who had vanished into thin air. Every footstep on the stairs made my heart leap into my throat. By evening, the town had quieted down. Martha brought me a tray with a bowl of thick, hearty soup and a piece of fresh bread. We were sitting at the small table in my room when a soft, coded knock came at the back door of the shop downstairs. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. It was Daniel. Martha let him in, and he came up the stairs, his face grim. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "It's worse than I thought," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Blackwood has gone to the sheriff. He's not just looking for a runaway bride. He's claiming you stole from him. A valuable piece of jewelry, he says. A family heirloom. It's a lie, of course, but it gives him legal authority. He's offering a reward. $500. My blood ran cold. $500. In this town, that was a fortune. Men would turn over their own mothers for that kind of money. I wasn't just a runaway anymore. I was a wanted criminal. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "You stay put," Martha said, her tone firm. "No one will think to look for a thief in a respectable dress shop." But he's right. This changes things. The employment contract might not be enough to protect you from a criminal charge. Daniel paced the small room, his mind clearly working. "He's trying to box us in. If his men find you, the sheriff will hold you until a judge can hear the case. And Blackwood owns every judge in a 100-mile radius. He won't send you to jail. He'll have the charges dropped the moment you agree to marry him." It was a brilliant, evil plan. He had turned my escape into a cage. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "There has to be another way," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Daniel stopped pacing. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "There is," he said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." Martha made a small sound of understanding and got to her feet. "He's right, Catherine. It's the only way." I looked from Daniel's intense face to Martha's knowing one. "What are you talking about? What is the only way?" The silence in the room stretched out, thick with unspoken meaning. Daniel's gaze was locked on mine, steady, unwavering, waiting for me to see the answer he couldn't bring himself to say. And then I understood. Blackwood was hunting an unmarried woman. A thief who had broken a marriage contract. An unmarried woman had few rights, especially when accused of a crime by a powerful man. But a married woman was a different story. In the eyes of the law, a married woman belonged to her husband. Her property was his property. Her legal troubles were his legal troubles. Another man, not even a man as powerful as Blackwood, could not simply claim another man's wife. "You," I whispered, the word barely audible. "You're suggesting that I marry someone else." The silence was the only answer I needed. My mind reeled. Who? Who would possibly agree to such a thing? And then I looked at Daniel, and I knew. "It would be for protection only," he said quickly, the words rushing out of him. "A marriage in name, nothing more. We find a justice of the peace in the morning. We file the papers. It creates a legal barrier that Blackwood can't cross. It makes his contract with your uncle void. It makes his theft charge a domestic dispute between 2 families. It buys us time. When he finally gives up and moves on, we can have it annulled. You would be free." My head was spinning. Marry Daniel, the quiet, stable hand from back home. A man I barely knew, and yet a man who had already risked everything for me. It was insane. It was unthinkable. Martha put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's a practical solution to a deadly problem, dear. Think about it. What other choice do you have?" She was right. I had no other choice. It was this, or it was Blackwood. After Martha left us alone, the little room felt charged with a strange new energy. This man, who I had only ever seen as a kind friend, was offering me his name, his protection, his entire future, to save me from mine. "Why?" I asked him, the question raw and honest. "Why are you doing all of this for me, Daniel?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound weariness, and something else. Something deeper. "I told you before, Catherine. I've been watching you for years. I saw your kindness. I saw your strength when your parents passed. I saw you sitting under that oak tree, lost in your books. He finally met my eyes, and the vulnerability I saw there took my breath away. The truth is, I've been in love with you since we were 17 years old. I just never had the right or the courage to say it. You were my employer's daughter. I was just the stable boy. But here, out here, we're just a man and a woman, and I can't stand by and watch him destroy you. My heart, which I thought had been frozen with fear, began to beat again, a painful, stuttering rhythm. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever seen me like that. He was offering me a shield, a legal fiction, a marriage in name only. But as I looked at him, at the quiet integrity in his eyes, at the fierce protectiveness in his stance, I realized something. If I did this, if I agreed to become Catherine Foster, I didn't want it to be a lie. A life built on a lie was just another kind of prison. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking but clear. If we do this, Daniel, I don't want it to be in name only. Not forever. I want it to be real. Something ignited in his eyes, a hope so bright it was almost painful to look at. I would want that too, Catherine, he said, his voice thick with emotion, more than you can possibly imagine. Then my answer is yes, I said, the words sealing my fate for a second time. But this time, it was a fate of my own choosing. Yes, I'll marry you. He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking my hands in his. They were warm and strong, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt safe. I promise, he said, his voice a solemn vow. I will not let you down, Catherine. He will not have you. But we both knew this was far from over. Marrying me would solve one problem, but it would create a much bigger one. It would turn me from a runaway bride into a contested prize, and it would paint a target squarely on Daniel Foster's back. We hadn't just created a legal barrier. We had declared war on Everett Blackwood. The next morning, the world felt sharp and new, humming with a terrifying, exhilarating energy. We didn't wait. Daniel knew a frontier judge, an old, grizzled man whose office smelled of stale whiskey and sawdust. He asked few questions, accepted Daniel's story that we were childhood sweethearts, and for the price of a $5 gold piece, he bound our lives together with a few short, simple words. Martha stood as our witness, her eyes shining with tears. Daniel had bought 2 simple gold bands from the general store. They felt heavy and foreign on my finger. As we stepped out of the judge's office and into the bright Wyoming sunlight, Daniel turned to me. Mrs. Foster, he said, testing the name on his tongue. It sounded strange and wonderful and utterly terrifying all at once. It doesn't feel real, I confessed, my voice a whisper. It will, he said, his hand finding mine. And now we have to make sure everyone knows it's real. Especially Blackwood. His plan was bold. It was dangerous. We were going to walk directly into the lion's den. That evening he escorted me to dinner, not at the small, quiet restaurant from before, but at the grand dining room of the Cattleman's Hotel, Blackwood's Hotel. I wore my best dress, my hair was pinned up neatly, and the plain gold band on my left hand felt like it was glowing. Every eye in the room was on us as we walked in. I could feel the whispers, the stares. Daniel, calm and composed, led me to a small table in the center of the room. He was making a statement. He was telling the whole town, and Blackwood, that I was not in hiding. I was under his protection. We were halfway through our meal when the dining room door swung open. It was him. Blackwood stood there, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. His eyes swept the room, and then they froze, locking onto me. For a moment he just stood there, his face a thunderous mask of disbelief. Then the disbelief curdled into pure, incandescent rage. He strode toward our table, his heavy boots thudding on the polished floorboards. The entire room fell silent. "Miss Hartley," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous growl. He was looming over me, his shadow blotting out the light. "What is the meaning of this?" Daniel rose slowly from his chair, his movements deliberate and calm. He was not as tall as Blackwood, but he stood with a quiet confidence that seemed to make him bigger. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice clear and even, ringing through the silent room, "I believe you've met my wife, Catherine Foster." He emphasized the name. Foster. The effect on Blackwood was instantaneous. His face, already red with anger, turned a shade of deep, mottled purple. Wife? He choked out, the word strangled. This woman is promised to me. I have a contract. You have a contract with her uncle, Daniel corrected him smoothly. A business arrangement made 3,000 miles away. You do not have a contract with Catherine. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, she is my lawfully wedded wife. The papers are filed with the territorial court. You are welcome to inspect them. Blackwood was speechless, his jaw working silently. He looked from Daniel's unyielding face to the gold band on my finger. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed. In his own town, in his own hotel, in front of all his associates, he had been made a fool of by a common stable hand. His cold eyes swiveled to me, and the look in them made my blood turn to ice. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You will regret this, he whispered, his voice shaking with fury. Both of you. I found my voice, a strength I didn't know I had, rising up to meet his threat. There is no deception, Mr. Blackwood, I said, my voice steady. I have made my choice. Freely. For a moment I thought he might strike me. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, but the entire room was watching. With a visible effort, he reined in his rage. He straightened his expensive coat, his face a cold, tight mask. Enjoy your marriage, he spat, the words dripping with contempt. We will see how free your choice feels when winter comes. When you're living in a shack, married to a man who smells of horse manure. He turned on his heel and stalked out of the dining room, his men trailing behind him like wolves. As the doors swung shut, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My hands were trembling. Are you all right? Daniel asked, his hand covering mine on the table. I nodded, though my heart was still hammering. Yes, but he's not finished. This isn't over. No, Daniel agreed, his eyes dark with worry. It's not over, but we've won the first battle. He can't force you to go with him now. Legally, you are mine. The words hung in the air between us. Legally, you are mine. Our marriage was a shield, a legal fiction. But as I looked at the man who had just faced down the most dangerous man in Wyoming for me, I felt a flicker of something new. Something that had nothing to do with legality and everything to do with the heart. The next few weeks were a strange dance of pretense and reality. We established a routine. I began working at the dress shop, discovering a talent for needlework I never knew I possessed. Martha was a patient teacher and a fierce protector. Daniel continued his work at the livery. For propriety's sake, and because our marriage was still just a shield, I continued to live in the small room above the shop. But every evening, Daniel would come for me. We would walk through the town, have dinner, and be seen together. We were building our story, cementing our lie in the public eye until it became the truth. We talked for hours, learning about each other's pasts, our hopes, our fears. I learned that he dreamed of one day owning his own small ranch, a place to raise and train horses his own way, with patience and respect, not with fear and force. With each passing day, the lines between our fiction and a deeper truth began to blur. The comfortable silences, the easy laughter, the way he would instinctively reach for my hand as we walked down the street, it all started to feel less like an act and more like us. One night, a week after our public confrontation with Blackwood, he walked me back to the shop as usual. At the door to my room, he hesitated, reluctant to leave, and I realized I was just as reluctant to see him go. Would you like to come in for coffee? I asked, the words feeling bold and impulsive. His eyes lit up with a surprise and a pleasure that made my heart skip a beat. I'd like that very much, Catherine. We sat at my small table, the coffee long forgotten, and talked late into the night. It was well past midnight when he finally stood to leave. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, his back to me. Catherine, he said, his voice quiet, I know this isn't what you planned. I know this arrangement was born of desperation. But these past few days with you, they've been the happiest of my life. My breath caught in my throat. For me as well, Daniel, I whispered. He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was one of deep, unguarded emotion. He took a step closer, his hand coming up to gently cup my cheek. His touch was warm and sent a shiver down my spine. "As your husband," he murmured, his voice husky, "may I kiss you goodnight?" My heart was fluttering like a trapped bird. I could only nod. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. It was a soft, gentle kiss. It was hesitant and questioning, and full of a longing that mirrored my own. It was brief, but it left me breathless and trembling. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with an emotion so powerful it stole my words. "Good night, Catherine," he said softly. "Good night, Daniel." After he left, I stood in the middle of my small room, my fingers pressed to my lips. The kiss lingered, a warm, sweet ache in my chest. Our marriage had started as a desperate strategy, a shield against a monster. But now something real and beautiful and terrifying was beginning to grow behind that shield. And I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and frightened me that I was falling in love with my husband. 2 weeks after that first kiss, everything changed again. Daniel arrived at the dress shop one evening, his eyes shining with an excitement that was impossible to miss. He was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. "I found it," he announced, grinning from ear to ear. "Found what?" I asked, laughing at his infectious energy. "A place. For us." His smile softened, his expression turning serious. "A small house on the edge of town. Just 2 rooms, but the roof is sound, and it has a real porch. The owner is moving to California. He's selling it cheap. I can afford it, Catherine. We can afford it." My heart did a little flip in my chest. A house, a home, our home. "You want us to live together properly?" His eyes searched mine, his excitement tempered by a gentle caution. "Only if you're ready. I won't rush you. Our arrangement, it stands. Whatever you're comfortable with." I thought of the nightly goodbyes at my door, the lingering touches, the unspoken words that hung in the air between us. I thought of his gentle kiss and the way my heart ached after he left. I was more than ready. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I'm ready, Daniel." The look of pure, unadulterated joy that spread across his face was a thing of beauty. We moved in the following Saturday. Martha and her brother helped us with my few belongings, and Daniel brought his small trunk from the livery. The house was tiny, just a main room with a cook stove and a bedroom barely big enough for a bed. But it had a window that caught the morning sun and a porch that looked out over the rolling prairies. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. That first night, after we'd arranged our meager furniture, a strange, awkward silence fell between us. We were husband and wife. We were in our own home. But the line between our convenient arrangement and a real marriage was a threshold we had not yet crossed. We ate a simple supper of bread and cheese by lamplight. After we finished, Daniel cleared his throat. I can sleep out here," he said, gesturing to the main room floor. "I'll be comfortable enough on a bedroll until you're ready for, well, you know." I looked at him, at this good, honorable man who was willing to sleep on the floor of his own house to make me feel safe. And I knew I couldn't let him. I couldn't live a lie anymore, not even a well-intentioned one. I stood up and walked over to him, gathering all my courage. I took his hand. "Daniel," I said softly, "when I said I wanted this to be a real marriage, I meant it, in every way." I took a shaky breath. "I'm nervous, but I don't want my husband sleeping on the floor." His eyes darkened with an emotion I couldn't quite read. He stood up, his hand tightening on mine. "Are you sure, Catherine?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I meant what I said. I will wait as long as you need." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steadier now. I led him toward the small bedroom. "I don't want to wait anymore." That night, in our little house on the edge of the wild Wyoming prairie, our marriage became real. He was so gentle, so tender, as if he were holding something infinitely precious and fragile. He showed me a love that was patient and passionate and utterly selfless. Lying in his arms afterward, with the moonlight streaming through the window, I felt a sense of peace and rightness that I had never known. This was home. He was home. "I love you, Daniel Foster," I whispered against his chest, the words feeling as natural as breathing. His arms tightened around me, holding me close. "I've loved you for half my life, Catherine," he murmured into my hair. "I just never dreamed I'd be lucky enough to have you love me back." Spring melted into a warm, golden summer. Our little house became a home filled with laughter and love. I continued my work at the dress shop, and Daniel's reputation as the best horseman in Cheyenne grew. We saved every penny we could, our shared dream of our own horse ranch feeling less like a fantasy and more like a plan. We heard whispers about Blackwood. He was still in Cheyenne, still nursing his wounded pride. He'd reportedly taken a trip to Denver and returned with a new prospective bride, a wealthy widow. I allowed myself to hope that he had finally moved on, that he had forgotten about us. It was a foolish hope. In late August, when the summer heat was at its peak, I realized I was with child. The knowledge was a terrifying, wonderful secret that I held close for a whole day before telling Daniel. When I finally did, his reaction was everything I had hoped for. His face transformed, breaking into a smile so bright it could have lit up the darkest night. "A baby?" he breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. He knelt before me, placing a gentle, trembling hand on my still flat stomach. "Our baby." He looked up at me, his eyes shining. This is everything." The months that followed were the happiest of my life. We were a family. The threat of Blackwood seemed to fade into the background, a bad dream from another lifetime. Winter came early that year, blanketing Cheyenne in a thick layer of snow. I was 5 months along, and Daniel became fiercely protective, insisting I stay indoors, safe from the icy streets. One afternoon, Daniel was at the livery, and I was home alone, mending one of his shirts by the fire. A heavy snow was falling, muffling the world in a blanket of white silence. There was a knock at the door. I assumed it was Martha, who often brought me scraps of fabric from the shop. I opened the door without hesitation, and my world shattered. It was Everett Blackwood. He stood on my porch, the falling snow dusting the shoulders of his expensive coat, his eyes as cold and dead as the winter landscape behind him. "Mrs. Foster," he said, a cruel smile twisting his lips, "I believe you and I have some unfinished business." Fear, cold and absolute, seized me. My hand flew to my belly. "My husband will be home any minute," I lied, my voice a weak tremor. "No," Blackwood said, pushing past me into the warmth of our small home. "He won't." He looked around our cozy room with undisguised contempt. "Your husband received an urgent message about half an hour ago. A prize stallion at my ranch has taken ill. A very valuable animal. He left immediately, of course. He won't be back before nightfall. If he makes it back at all in this storm." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was a lie. A trap. Daniel would never have gone without telling me. Blackwood had lured him away. Or worse. "What do you want?" I backed away from him, my eyes darting around the room, searching for a weapon. An escape. "Justice," he said, his voice soft and menacing as he advanced on me. "I paid a good price for you. I was publicly humiliated. You and your stable boy made a fool of me." His eyes dropped to my swollen belly and his cruel smile widened. "And now I see you've given him a child. How domestic." "Leave my home," I ordered, my hand closing around the handle of the heavy iron skillet on the stove. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't think so. I came here today to frighten you, to make you understand what it means to cross me, but now I see a much more fitting punishment." His eyes were gleaming with a sick, twisted light. "Your husband took what was mine. It seems only fair that I should return the favor." He lunged for me. I swung the skillet with every ounce of strength I had, catching him hard on the shoulder. He roared in pain and rage, the sound inhuman. He knocked the skillet from my hand, and it clattered to the floor. He grabbed my arm, his fingers biting into my flesh like a steel trap, spinning me around to face him. "You'll pay for that, you little—" The front door burst open with a crash of splintered wood, letting in a swirl of snow and frigid air. Daniel stood in the doorway. His face was a mask of pure, murderous fury, and in his hand, steady as a rock, was a pistol aimed directly at Blackwood's heart. "Take your hands off my wife." Each word was a frozen shard of ice. deadly and precise. Blackwood released me instantly, his hands flying up in a gesture of surrender. Foster, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you broke into my home, Daniel said, advancing into the room, the gun never wavering. It looks like you put your hands on my pregnant wife. He came to a stop just a few feet from Blackwood. Now give me one good reason why I shouldn't end your miserable life right here, right now. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. Blackwood's arrogance had vanished, replaced by the stark, primal fear of a man staring down the barrel of his own death. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was going to do it. Daniel, no! The words tore from my throat. I rushed to his side, placing a trembling hand on his arm. The muscles there were coiled as tight as a spring, his whole body shaking with a rage so profound it was terrifying. Don't do it! He's not worth it! Our baby! Our baby needs a father, not a memory. His eyes, blazing with fury, were locked on Blackwood. For a long, terrible moment, I thought my words hadn't reached him. He was lost in a red haze of vengeance. Then slowly, painfully, I felt some of the tension go out of his arm. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and the gun lowered, just an inch. He never took his eyes off Blackwood. You're right, he said, his voice still a low, dangerous growl. He's not worth the rope they'd hang me with. He refocused his lethal glare on the terrified cattle baron. I'm giving you 10 seconds to get out of my house. And if I ever see you, if I even hear your name spoken near my wife or my child again, I will find you, and I will finish this. Judge and jury be damned. This isn't over, Foster, Blackwood stammered, trying to regain some shred of his dignity as he backed toward the door. 5 seconds, Daniel snarled. Blackwood scrambled out into the blizzard, not even bothering to close the splintered door behind him. Daniel slammed it shut, the sound echoing the violent beating of my own heart. He leaned his forehead against the rough wood, the pistol hanging limply in his hand. Then he turned to me, the rage in his face dissolving into raw, gut-wrenching fear. Did he hurt you? He whispered, his hands hovering over me, afraid to touch. The baby? Is the baby all right? We're fine, I choked out, guiding his hand to my stomach. As if on cue, our child gave a strong, vigorous kick, a little message of resilience from within. See? We're fighters. Like their pa. He pulled me into his arms then, crushing me against him, his body trembling with the aftermath of his fury. I almost lost you, he murmured into my hair. I was at the livery. Mrs. McClintock's brother saw Blackwood heading this way. He came and got me. I've never ridden a horse so fast in my life. But you made it, I whispered, clinging to him. You always make it. That night, as the storm raged outside, we lay in bed. The warmth of our small home, a fragile shield against the cold, cruel world. We both knew the truth. This was not the end. He won't stop, I said into the darkness. A man like that, his pride is everything. We humiliated him. He tried to hurt us. He will try again. Daniel was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a grim resignation. I know, as long as we are in Cheyenne, as long as we are within his reach, we will never be safe. He owns this town. A new resolve, born of a mother's fierce love, settled in my heart. Then we leave, I said simply. Leave? He asked. Go where? We have a life here, Catherine. Our home, your work, my job. None of that matters, I said, placing my hand over his where it rested protectively on my belly. This is what matters. Our family. We can start again. Somewhere new. Somewhere he can't find us. He sighed, a long, weary sound. You're right. Of course, you're right. He kissed my forehead. But we can't travel in this weather. Not in your condition. We'll wait. We'll wait until spring, after the baby comes. We'll save our money, make our plans quietly, and then we'll disappear. So we waited. The winter was long and tense. Daniel was a shadow at my side, rarely letting me out of his sight. The fear was a constant, unwelcome guest in our home, a cold presence that lingered in the corners of every room. But alongside the fear, our love deepened. forged stronger in the crucible of our shared danger. And inside me, our baby grew, a promise of a new life, a new beginning. March arrived, melting the snow and bringing with it the first warm winds of spring. On a clear, bright morning, my labor began. Martha came, along with a midwife, and after long, hard hours as the sun was setting, our daughter was born. She was perfect, a tiny, fierce creature with a shock of dark hair like her father's, and a cry that filled the small house with a sound of pure, unadulterated life. When Daniel held her for the first time, his big calloused hands trembling, he looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. "What should we name her?" he whispered, his voice thick with awe. I had thought of many names, but in that moment, only one felt right. "Hope," I said, "because that's what she is. That's what you both are to me. Hope." "Hope Foster," he said, testing the name as our daughter's tiny fingers curled around his. "It's perfect." For a few precious weeks, we lived in a bubble of new parent exhaustion and bliss. Hope was our entire world, but the shadow of Blackwood still loomed. We knew we couldn't wait much longer. "I've been making inquiries," Daniel said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "There's land up north, near a town called Sheridan. It's new country, a place where a man is judged by the strength of his back, not the size of his wallet. A place we can be safe." The only problem was money. The land cost more than we had saved. Daniel, ever resourceful, found a solution. A cattle drive was heading north, right to the Sheridan area. The pay was good enough to secure our land, but it meant he would be gone for 3 long weeks, leaving me and Hope alone. "I don't like it," he said, his jaw tight. "Not after what happened." "We'll be fine," I assured him, though my own heart was filled with dread. "Martha will look after us. It's the only way, Daniel. For our future. For hope." The day he left was one of the hardest of my life. The house felt empty, silent, cold without him. The days crawled by. Hope was my anchor, her needs and her smiles pulling me through the long, lonely hours. 2 weeks into his absence, I was sitting on the porch, rocking Hope in my arms. A rider approached our house. My heart leaped into my throat thinking it was Daniel, home early. But it wasn't. It was Everett Blackwood. He stopped his horse at the edge of our yard, not dismounting. He just sat there looking at me. I clutched Hope tighter, my body going rigid with fear. "Don't be alarmed, Mrs. Foster," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I came to deliver a message." "I want nothing from you," I spat, backing toward the door. "I'm sure you don't," he said. "The message is this. I'm leaving Wyoming, moving my entire operation to Montana. I've bought a new ranch there. Bigger, better prospects." I stared at him, confused. Why was he telling me this? He seemed to read my mind. "I want you to know something," he continued, his cold eyes fixed on me. "I could have destroyed you. It would have been easy. An accident for your husband. A fire at your house. There are 1,000 ways to get rid of a problem in this territory." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "But I've decided against it. You're not worth the effort." He looked from me to the baby in my arms, and for the first time, I saw something in his expression other than hate. It looked almost like defeat. "I see now that your husband didn't steal you from me," he said, the words sounding like they were costing him a great deal. "He won you, and this life, this poor, simple life, is all the punishment you both deserve." He tipped his hat in a gesture of mock respect, turned his horse, and rode away without a backward glance. I stood on the porch, my heart pounding, watching him until he was just a speck on the horizon. I didn't understand. A man like Blackwood didn't just give up. It didn't make any sense. Daniel returned a week later, his face weathered from the trail, his wallet full. He burst through the door, sweeping me and Hope into his arms. That night, I told him about Blackwood's strange visit. He listened intently, a thoughtful frown on his face. "He's gone, Daniel," I said. "He said he was leaving for Montana." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "I know," he said. I stared at him. "What do you mean, you know?" "On that cattle drive," he began, "I wasn't just working cattle. The trail boss was a man named Miller. Turns out his sister was Everett Blackwood's second wife. The one who had the writing accident. My eyes widened. Miller never believed it was an accident, Daniel continued, his voice low. He'd been looking for proof for 3 years. He'd heard rumors about a disgruntled ranch hand of Blackwood's who saw something that day. On the drive, I had time. I tracked that hand down. He was terrified of Blackwood, but for the right price and the promise of protection, he was willing to talk. He'd seen Blackwood argue with his wife at the top of that ravine. He'd seen him push her. My hand flew to my mouth. Daniel, I took that information and the ranch hand to the territorial marshal in the next county over, a man Blackwood couldn't buy. The marshal paid a quiet visit to Blackwood last week. He gave him a choice. He could face a trial for murder, with a key witness and a jury that wasn't on his payroll, or he could sell his land, pack his bags, and be out of the Wyoming territory forever by the end of the month. It all clicked into place. Blackwood hadn't given up. He hadn't decided we weren't worth the effort. He had been beaten. He had been driven out, not by a gun, but by the truth. Daniel hadn't just protected us. He had delivered justice, quietly, patiently, and completely. My husband, the stable hand, had brought down an empire. 2 weeks later, our wagon was packed. Maple, our faithful mare, stood ready to pull us toward our new life. Daniel sat beside me, his strong arm around my shoulders, while Hope slept peacefully in a cradle he'd built with his own hands. As we rolled out of Cheyenne, leaving the town and all its ghosts behind us, I looked at the vast open country ahead. The land that had once seemed so terrifying now looked like a promise. I had come west as a piece of property, sold to a monster, my future a dark and terrifying void. But I had found a love I never imagined, and a strength I never knew I possessed. I had a husband who was my hero, a daughter who was my heart, and a future that we would build together under the wide and endless Wyoming sky. Our adventure was just beginning. This wasn't just a story about survival. It was a story about the quiet power of decency, the unwavering strength of love, and the simple truth that even in the darkest of places, hope can take root and grow. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear more tales of hidden truths and hard-won justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss another adventure.